This presentation is on the topic of global warming, which affects us all. I'm going to discuss two causes of global warming and how we can fight them in our daily lives. The first method of fighting global warming I'm going to discuss is to decrease the consumption of meat, and especially red meat. If you Google meat production environmental impact, you will get 44 million hits in half a second. So, here are the facts. Each kilo of meat produces the following amount of CO2 emissions. A kilo of beef produces around 26 kilos CO2, while a kilo of pork produces a third of these emissions, and chicken and fish produce half of that again. As you can see in this table, beans and particularly potatoes have barely any emissions. To slow down global warming, beef consumption has to be reduced by 90% and be replaced by 5 times more pulses within 2050. Methane emissions from fertilizer use and cows alone creates as much greenhouse gas emissions as all the world's cars, trucks, and airplanes combined. In addition to this, livestock farming takes up far more space than what growing beans and corn does and contributes to water pollution. The average consumption of meat in industrialized countries, such as Norway, is around 80 kilograms per person per year. So if everyone in our class, all 27 of us, went home and convinced our families to make some small changes in our diets, a lot could be achieved already. This is what I suggest. Imagine that everyone in class and their families cuts half their weekly meat consumption. In this calculation, I'm going to assume that the average family consists of 4 people. Only by doing this, we would altogether have saved approximately 4,000 kilograms of meat. This is the equivalent to 35,000 kilos CO2. When I take the average of beef, which has the highest CO2 emissions, and chicken, which has the lowest. This is the same amount of CO2 emissions that 7 cars produce per year, as the average vehicle emits about 4,600 kilos CO2 in a year. Although it might seem like a lot to cut meat consumption in half, we should also remember that a lot of this reduction can be achieved by switching to more CO2-friendly meats, such as chicken or fish. As well as being better for the environment, these types of meat do not cause the health risks that red meat like pork and beef do. The second solution to fighting global warming has to do with how we get from A to B. Transport accounts for 26% of global CO2 emissions, and according to the VIEW environmental calculator, it is estimated that taking the train from Asker station to Oslo Central Station is 7.5 times more environmentally friendly than driving a petrol-fueled car. Therefore, another solution to cutting CO2 emissions is to drive less, use more public transportation, and even better, use our own 2 legs. According to the statistics from VIEW's environmental calculator, driving a petrol-fueled car from Asker station to Oslo Central Station causes 2.5 kilos CO2 emissions, while taking the train from Asker station to Oslo Central Station only emits 0.3 kilos CO2. So, by taking the train instead of driving to work in Oslo from Asker twice a day, 5 times a week, doing the average of 44 work weeks a year, you would save 968 kilo CO2 emissions. In this case, I've taken in account that there are 2 people per car. The number of CO2 emissions saved would be even bigger if I could find more precise statistics on how many people there are per car, as I imagine that most of the cars only have 1 person in them. My suggestion is to make a deal with a friend or family member to get to school or work together, whether it is by taking the train, taking the bus, cycling, or even walking. Not only is this an easy way to fit fun social interaction in your busy work days, but you can also push each other to be environmentally friendly by making a commitment to, for example, taking the train together. If you are tempted to drive instead of taking the train, you would have to cancel your plans with your friend. And I bet you do not want to let your friend down. The suggestions I have given show that the more people who engage, the more you can achieve. In the presentation, I showed the calculations for how much CO2 emissions we can reduce just from cutting down how much meat we eat and what kind of meat we eat. And that we can cut even more by changing how we get to and from school or work. So, we can make a difference by changing things in our daily routines, and even more if we as a class act together. Imagine what we could achieve if we got other classes and even other schools to join us in these changes. It is human to think that one person cannot make a difference. But if everyone in this world thought like this, nothing would change. So let's change the world together.